The pen was already in my hand when my lawyer reached across the table and covered the signature line with 2 fingers. "Don't sign that." Her voice was low, almost calm, but it cut through the room harder than a scream. Across from me, my husband Daniel stopped breathing for half a second. I saw it. Just a flicker. A tiny crack in the perfect, patient face he had worn all morning. I looked down at the papers again. 32 pages of legal language I had been too tired, too heartbroken, and too humiliated to fight through. I was done. I wanted the marriage over. I wanted the coldness over. I wanted the nights of pretending my husband's silence didn't hurt more than yelling ever could. I just wanted to sign, stand up, and leave with what little dignity I had left. Then Miriam, my lawyer, slid the stack toward herself, turned to the back appendix, and tapped a paragraph so small it looked like it had been written for ants. "This clause," she said, looking straight at Daniel, "changes everything." Daniel leaned back like he was offended. Like this was all beneath him. "It's boilerplate." Miriam gave him a smile so thin it didn't count as one. "No. It's a trap." And just like that, the divorce papers in front of me stopped looking like an ending and started looking like a weapon. I should tell you that, by the time I sat in that office, I had not slept properly in months. I had cried in grocery store parking lots, in the shower, and once in my daughter's closet because it was the only room in the house with a lock that still worked. I was 38 years old, and I had somehow become a stranger inside my own life. Daniel and I had been married for 13 years. Long enough to build habits, routines, private jokes, and one beautiful 10-year-old daughter named Lily, who still believed that if 2 people stayed quiet long enough, the bad thing would go away on its own. I used to believe that too. I think that was my first mistake. When I met Daniel, he was warm, ambitious, and impossible not to trust. He remembered tiny details. He brought soup when I was sick, flowers when I had a bad day, and once drove 3 hours just to fix a broken pipe in my mother's kitchen. My mother said I had found a man who knew how to love without making it loud. I believed her. But love can go quiet in 2 different ways. One is peace, the other is absence. It took me years to understand the difference. After Lily was born, Daniel's career exploded. He moved into private wealth management, started working with people whose names appeared on hospital wings and museum walls, and suddenly our life became dinners. I was too nervous to attend, and vacations he was too busy to enjoy. He said it was for us, for Lily, for security, for the future. I stopped teaching art when Lily was 4 because Daniel's schedule was chaos and somebody had to be the stable parent. Somebody had to remember dentist appointments, school forms, food allergies, sleepovers, fevers, recitals, and all the tiny invisible jobs that keep a family standing. Daniel always thanked me for being the heart of the home. Funny how men say things like that right before they start treating you like furniture. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how gradually he disappeared while still sleeping 6 feet away from me. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped reaching for my hand in public, stopped noticing when I bought a dress or got a haircut or spent an entire afternoon trying not to cry. He became careful, polished, impossible to argue with, because he never quite raised his voice. He just made me feel unreasonable for having one. If I asked why he was working late again, I was insecure. If I asked why he took calls outside, I was paranoid. If I asked why our joint savings account kept dropping by strange amounts, I didn't understand investments. He had an answer for everything, and each answer landed like a small, clean blade. Then last winter, he sat me down at our kitchen island, folded his hands, and said, "I think we've both known for a while that this marriage is over. Not, I'm hurting. Not, can we fix this? Not even, I'm sorry." Just a conclusion. Like he was announcing weather. I remember staring at the fruit bowl between us because if I looked at his face, I knew I would shatter. Lily was upstairs doing homework. The dishwasher was running. Outside, our neighbor was laughing with someone in the driveway. The whole world kept moving while mine split open so quietly I almost missed the sound. I asked if there was someone else. He sighed. Not guilty, Annoyed. This is exactly why these conversations are hard with you. That was Daniel's gift. He could walk into a room holding gasoline and somehow leave you apologizing for the smoke. And then everything changed. Within 48 hours, he had a draft settlement. Within a week, he had moved into a high-rise apartment downtown temporarily. He told me he wanted a clean, respectful divorce. No fighting, no ugly court battle. He said Lily had already been through enough tension and deserved peace. He said if I signed quickly, he would let me stay in the house until Lily finished middle school. He would provide support. We could co-parent like adults. The speed of it made me dizzy. Our marriage had died in slow motion, but the divorce moved like a train. My best friend Nina told me maybe quick was good. Maybe he just wants it done, she said over coffee, squeezing my hand. Dragging it out will only hurt more. My sister Elise said the same thing, though with more anger than comfort. Take what you can get. Men like Daniel always land on their feet. I wanted to believe that signing would stop the bleeding. I wanted to believe that if I cooperated, he would stay kind. I wanted to believe the man I married was still somewhere under the cold, polished stranger who now sent me bullet-point emails about visitation schedules. So I nearly said yes. The only reason I called Miriam was because my mother, before she died, had written her name on the back of an old electric bill and told me, if you ever feel pressured to make a decision fast, call this woman first. My mother trusted very few people. Miriam Hale was one of them. She was 67, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and spoke like someone who had spent decades watching lies dress themselves as paperwork. When I first sat in her office, I expected a lecture. Instead, she asked one question. Do you want freedom? She said. Or do you want peace at any price? I didn't know how to answer that. She reviewed the draft Daniel's lawyer sent over and frowned more with each page. Not dramatically. Just enough to make my stomach tighten. When I asked what was wrong, she said, a fair agreement doesn't usually arrive this fast from a man with this much to lose. I laughed nervously and told her Daniel wasn't a monster. He just wanted out. Miriam didn't argue. She only said, then let's make sure he leaves without taking pieces of you. He no longer has a right to. What I didn't tell her then was that strange things had already started happening. Bills I had never seen before were suddenly showing up in my online account. A credit line had been opened under a business name I didn't recognize. Daniel told me not to worry about it. Tax structure, he said. Normal. One night, Lily came into my room holding her stuffed rabbit and asked, are we moving far away? I sat up so fast I scared her. Who told you that? She looked down. Dad said maybe. He said some families need fresh starts. I called Daniel immediately. He let it ring 3 times before answering. You told our daughter we might move? I said maybe, he replied. You always twist things. Where would we be moving, Daniel? He exhaled like I was exhausting him. See? This is why I want this handled quickly. He hung up on me. I didn't know what was coming next. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel became almost aggressively generous in public and increasingly cold in private. In front of Lily's school principal, he talked about staying united as parents. At a soccer game, he draped his arm around my shoulder for exactly long enough to let people think we were working things out. But in emails, he pushed. Sign by Friday. Sign before month's end. Sign now and avoid unnecessary complications. Complications. He used that word a lot. Then there were the missing things. One folder from our home office. My mother's trust documents, an old hard drive Daniel said must have been misplaced during his move. I tore through closets and drawers, telling myself grief had made me disorganized. Still, every time I failed to find something, I heard Miriam's voice. A fair agreement doesn't usually arrive this fast. She asked for financial disclosures. Daniel's attorney delayed. She asked again. More delay. She requested documentation for 2 business entities connected to our shared taxes. One came back, the other didn't. Daniel texted me that night. You're making this uglier than it has to be. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Not because I was shocked. because some part of me was still trained to feel guilty. When I didn't answer, he sent another one. If you force litigation, the house becomes a discussion. There it was, the real pressure point. The house had belonged to my mother before it was ours. Not legally, after renovations and refinancing, it had become marital property in complicated ways, but emotionally, morally, spiritually, it was the only place on earth that still felt like family after her death. The blue kitchen cabinets she painted herself, the porch swing Daniel once fixed for her, the rose bushes she planted for Lily the week she was born. Daniel knew exactly what that house meant to me. And then he aimed at it. But that wasn't the worst part. 3 days before the signing meeting, I ran into Nina outside a restaurant downtown. She was stepping out just as I was passing by. She looked startled. Too startled for a woman simply seeing a friend. Then Daniel came out behind her, phone in hand, tie loosened, expression blank for only one dangerous second before it smoothed into surprise. "Sarah," he said, as if I were the unexpected one. Nina jumped in quickly. "Oh my God, this looks bad," but it's not. Daniel wanted advice about Lily. He thought I could help. Nina was a child therapist. It wasn't impossible. It just didn't feel true. Daniel stepped forward. "We were discussing how to make this easier on Lily. I didn't mention it because I knew you'd misread it." Misread it. Again. I smiled because I was too numb to do anything else. I told them to enjoy dinner and walked away before my legs gave out. I made it 2 blocks before I ducked into a pharmacy and cried in the aisle with the bandages and cough syrup. When I finally called Nina later that night, she let it ring out. She texted instead, "You need rest. Please don't spiral." That was when suspicion turned into something sharper. Not proof. Not yet. But the feeling that I had been the last person invited to understand my own life. The morning of the signing, Daniel arrived in a navy suit and the same watch I gave him on our 10th anniversary. He kissed Lily on the forehead before school, told her mom and I are settling adult things, and left. I watched from the front window as he got into his car without once looking back at the house. At the law office, his attorney smiled too much. Daniel didn't smile at all. He sat straight-backed, composed, hands folded on the table like a man attending a board meeting rather than the legal funeral of his family. Miriam read in silence for several minutes, then asked for the final attachment Daniel's lawyer had added the night before. "Routine," his attorney said. Miriam's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Routine additions should not affect custodial authority, trust administration, and post-decree indemnity." The room went still. I turned to her. "What does that mean?" She laid the pages flat in front of me and spoke carefully, like she was placing each word where it could not be ignored. "It means, if you sign this, you are not only waiving claim to certain business assets, you're also agreeing that Daniel may relocate Lily temporarily for educational or residential reasons with minimal notice pending future review. And you are accepting liability for any debt tied to Hawthorne Residential Holdings." I blinked. "What is Hawthorne Residential Holdings?" Daniel answered too fast. "A dormant entity. It means nothing." Miriam didn't even look at him. "It means enough to have for $86,000 in exposure attached to it." The pen fell out of my hand. I felt the blood leave my face so quickly the room tilted. "Liability? How can I be liable for debt I never signed for?" "You may have," Miriam said quietly, "or someone may be relying on documents that suggest you did." I turned to Daniel, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel sad. I felt afraid. "What did you do?" He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Don't create drama where there isn't any. Miriam is inflaming a technicality." "A technicality," she repeated. "You attempted to bury a relocation clause and debt transfer in post-settlement language." Daniel's attorney cut in, flustered now. "This can be revised." Miriam closed the file. "It will not be signed." Daniel's jaw flexed. There it was again, that brief, ugly flash beneath the polished mask. "Sarah," he said, trying a softer tone, "listen to me. This is exactly the kind of escalation I was hoping to avoid." Escalation. As if I had done this. as if he had not just tried to make me responsible for $500,000 while giving himself a pass to move our daughter without real consent. I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. You tried to trick me. He rose too, voice tightening. Lower your voice. No. The word came out before I could soften it, before I could be reasonable, before I could be the woman who kept peace at her own expense. No, Daniel. You don't get to do this, and then tell me how loudly I'm allowed to react. And then everything changed. We left without signing. Daniel called me 13 times that afternoon. I answered none of them. Then the email started. Misunderstanding, clerical carryover, unfortunate drafting issue. He said Miriam was weaponizing ambiguity for fees. By evening, his tone had changed. If you blow this up, everyone loses. An hour later, think carefully before taking legal advice from people who don't know the full picture. At 11:42 p.m., you are not prepared for what litigation will uncover. I read that last message 3 times. What litigation will uncover? Not what it would cost, not how it would hurt Lily. What it would uncover. Miriam filed an emergency motion the next morning to freeze enforcement of any proposed relocation or trust transfer language. She also subpoenaed records for Hawthorne Residential Holdings, the entity Daniel had dismissed as dormant. While she worked, I went home and tried to act normal for Lily, who kept looking from my face to my phone like she knew a storm had already entered the house. That night, she asked if Dad was mad at me. I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect her from adult cruelty the way mothers think they can, by translating it into weather. Just a rough patch. Just stress. Just grown-up stuff. Instead, I pulled her into my lap and said, Dad and I disagree about some important things, but none of this is your fault. She pressed her cheek into my shoulder. He said if you make things hard, the judge might decide where I live. It took everything in me not to shake. Did he say that to you? She nodded against me. I held her tighter and smiled into her hair because children can hear tears even when they can't see them. After she fell asleep, I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and threw up. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 days later, Daniel filed for temporary emergency custody, claiming I had become emotionally unstable, financially reckless, and resistant to cooperative planning. He attached screenshots of frantic texts I had sent in the worst nights of our separation messages, where I begged for honesty, for answers, for basic decency. Out of context, I looked shattered, because I had been. He also included a letter from a therapist recommending transitional stability for Lily during divorce proceedings. The therapist was Nina. When Miriam called to tell me, I thought I had misheard her. Nina wrote it? Yes. No, I whispered. No, she wouldn't. She did. The room around me blurred. Nina had held my hand when my mother died. Mina had brought casseroles after Lily was born. Nina had listened to me cry for hours when Daniel moved out. And while I was telling her I couldn't sleep, she was helping him build a case that I was too unstable to keep my daughter. I called Nina immediately. This time she answered. Her voice was low, cautious. Sarah, you wrote that letter? Silence. Then I was asked for an opinion based on what I'd observed. What you observed? I laughed, and it sounded horrible. You observed me falling apart because my husband was destroying my life. You are falling apart, she said, almost pleading. That's what scares me? No, I said. What scares you is that I know something is wrong. She inhaled sharply. You need help, not another enemy. Are you sleeping with him? Another silence. Longer this time. That was answer enough. I hung up without waiting for words. I don't remember much about the next hour except the sound of my own breathing. Miriam later told me I called her and spoke in complete sentences, but I have no memory of it. I only remember standing in my kitchen, staring at the porch swing moving in the wind, and realizing betrayal has weight. You can actually feel it settle on your chest. Still, heartbreak had become a luxury I no longer had. Miriam came over that evening with folders, legal pads, and the kind of focus that makes panic step back. She sat at my kitchen table, looked me in the eye, and said, "I need you clear. Daniel is counting on your pain to make you disorganized." I wiped my face. "Tell me what you need." "Everything. Passwords, account access, old emails, tax returns, any trust papers tied to your mother's estate. And one more thing. Did you ever sign anything for Daniel without reading it?" I thought about refinancing forms, school loan papers, a medical consent packet for my mother years earlier. Marriage is built on 1,000 tiny acts of assumed trust. "I don't know," I said. She nodded like that answer confirmed something. "Then we start there." And then everything changed again. The subpoena results came back in pieces. Hawthorne Residential Holdings was not dormant. It had been active for 18 months. It held a line of credit secured partly against renovation estimates and projected equity connected to our home. There were transfers from that line into a consulting account, then out again to 2 destinations, one luxury apartment lease downtown and one private account under initials MR. "Who is MR?" Miriam asked. I stared at the page until the letters stopped swimming. "I don't know." But my stomach knew before my mouth did. Mara Reese. Daniel's executive assistant. I had met her twice at charity events. Blonde, immaculate, 30-ish, with the bright, efficient smile of someone who knew how to disappear in plain sight. Daniel once told me she was indispensable. I remember teasing him that he sounded more affectionate about her than about me. He didn't laugh. I should have remembered that. Miriam kept digging. The more she dug, the uglier it got. Daniel had been moving money for months, maybe longer, using shell structures complicated enough to confuse anyone who wanted peace more than clarity. And buried inside my mother's trust records was a draft amendment naming Daniel as temporary administrative co-trustee in the event of my incapacity, absence, or legal unavailability. "I never approved that," I said. Miriam tapped the signature line. "Then, either this is forged or it was slipped into a packet you signed under another pretext." My hands started shaking again. Why would he need control of my mother's trust? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Because that trust holds the last clean asset he can still reach through you. The house, part of the land, a small educational fund for Lily. Pieces of my mother's life, rewritten as opportunity." For the first time, my grief over the marriage gave way to a colder, harder truth. Daniel did not simply want out. He wanted out with a prize. What I saw next shocked me even more. Miriam sent a forensic document examiner to review the trust amendment and several loan acknowledgments tied to Hawthorne. One signature was mine, 2 were imitations, good ones, but not good enough. Flight pressure differences, wrong slant on the final H, a pause mark where my hand would normally flow. Someone had forged me. When Daniel's attorney was informed, he responded with outrage and denial, accusing us of harassment and delay. But his language had changed. He was suddenly eager to negotiate, suddenly open to pausing custody motions, suddenly interested in preserving the dignity of both parties. Dignity. It's amazing how fast that word appears when rich men realize documentation exists, but Daniel still had leverage. He had money, connections, and the confidence of someone who had been winning for a long time. He froze one joint card, he delayed support payments. He told Lily he couldn't take her on a planned weekend trip because Mom's lawyers are making everything difficult. He planted his version of events like seeds and trusted them to grow. Then the school called me. Daniel had submitted preliminary transfer inquiry forms to a private academy in Connecticut. Not maybe. Not someday. Already. I sat in the parking lot gripping the steering wheel until my fingers cramped. Miriam had stopped the clause, but Daniel had clearly been moving toward relocation anyway. Whether with Lily or without me, he had a plan. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew one thing for sure. If I kept reacting instead of anticipating, I would lose. So I stopped being polite. I gave Miriam permission to go after everything. Full discovery. Financials. Phone records were available. Communications involving the trust. Educational transfer correspondence. We hired a custody evaluator. We interviewed Lily's teacher, who quietly admitted Daniel had been asking unusual questions for weeks about whether Lily ever seemed anxious around her mother. I started writing everything down. Dates, times, comments, every manipulation, every missing document, every threat disguised as concern. And as I got organized, something inside me changed. Not all at once. I was still scared. Still grieving. Still waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing. But fear stopped owning the whole room. It had to make space for anger, and anger, when it's finally honest, can be clarifying. Then came the hearing. It wasn't the final trial, just a temporary custody proceeding. But Daniel walked in like victory was already tailored to his suit. Nina was there. She wouldn't look at me. Mara Reese sat behind Daniel's legal team, taking notes like this was another business meeting. Miriam whispered, "Good. Let them all be in one room." Daniel testified first. He was heartbreakingly convincing. Concerned father. Distressed husband, a man forced into legal conflict by a wife who could not regulate her emotions. He said he feared I was becoming unpredictable. He said he sought structure for Lily's sake. He said the relocation inquiry was only exploratory. Then Miriam stood. She didn't raise her voice once. She just asked questions in the exact order Payne hates. "Mr. Pand, Bennett, if relocation was merely exploratory, why did you represent to your daughter that a move might depend on her mother's cooperation?" Daniel shifted. "I don't recall the exact phrasing. Do you recall filing debt instruments tied to Hawthorne Residential Holdings while representing the entity as dormant in settlement discussions?" His attorney objected. Miriam adjusted, kept walking. "Do you recall submitting documents naming yourself co-trustee to assets historically connected to Mrs. Bennett's family?" Another objection. Sustained. But the judge was listening now, and then Miriam introduced the forensic findings. Not as proof of final guilt, just enough to show concern, enough to show disputed signatures, enough to make emergency custody based on my instability look less like protection and more like strategy. Daniel's expression changed for the first time in open court. A small thing. Barely visible unless you knew him. I knew him. The judge denied his emergency request. Temporary custody remained shared. No relocation. No trust changes. Full financial disclosure ordered within 10 days. Daniel passed me in the hallway afterward and leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You think this makes you safe?" I turned to him slowly. "No. I think it makes you visible." For the first time in a very long time, he looked uncertain. But that wasn't the end, not even close. The bigger twist arrived in a cardboard banker's box delivered to Miriam's office 3 days later. Inside were compliance records from Daniel's firm, transaction approvals, internal review memos, and one sealed notice that should never have crossed into our divorce case except for one fact. The notice referenced property and trust assets potentially tied to a spouse's signature. Daniel was under internal investigation, not for an affair, not for sloppy paperwork, for moving client-adjacent funds through personal entities in ways that could be interpreted as fraud. I sat in Miriam's office staring at the document while rain streaked the window behind her. "He used our divorce," I said slowly, "to cover something bigger." She nodded. "That's what it looks like. The hidden clause wasn't just about money or even about punishing me. Daniel needed a legal reason to transfer exposure away from himself. If I signed, I would absorb debt, legitimize questionable structures, and give him a route to liquidate protected assets if everything else collapsed. The relocation clause would have helped him control the narrative around Lily while he repositioned. I pressed a hand to my mouth. He was willing to use our daughter as part of an escape plan. Miriam didn't soften it. Yes. I thought I had already seen the bottom of betrayal. I was wrong. And then everything changed one last time. Miriam's investigator pulled security footage from Daniel's apartment building, transaction records from the lease account, and phone logs obtained through discovery. Mara Reese had not merely received money. She had been managing side communications with Daniel for over a year. But that still wasn't the biggest shock. The private number Daniel texted most during the month he asked for divorce was not Mara's. It was Nina's. The affair wasn't recent. It had started almost 11 months earlier, before Daniel announced the separation, while Nina was still sitting at my table telling me I deserved honesty. Worse, several messages suggested Nina had advised Daniel on how courts tend to respond to mothers described as emotionally volatile but functional. She had helped him script concern. When Miriam showed me those printouts, I didn't cry. I went completely still. Because some betrayals burn and some freeze. One message from Nina read, "If she feels cornered, she'll send pages of texts. Don't engage in anger. Save them." Another from Daniel, "Once papers are signed, it gets cleaner. Cleaner." I wondered if either of them ever looked at me and saw a human being, or if I had become a project long before I became a problem. Miriam asked if I wanted time before using the records. I surprised both of us by saying no. "Use everything," I said. "I'm done protecting people who planned my collapse." From there, the case accelerated fast. Daniel's firm placed him on leave. His attorney tried to separate the financial investigation from the divorce, but the overlap was undeniable. Miriam filed motions challenging every document tied to my name. The court appointed a neutral accountant. Nina received notice that her therapeutic opinion would be reviewed for bias and possible ethical misconduct. Daniel called me from a blocked number that night. When I answered, he was breathing hard like he'd been pacing. "You've destroyed everything," he said. I looked around the dark kitchen, at the framed school photo of Lily on the counter, at the small yellow crack in the ceiling Daniel promised to fix for 6 months before moving out. "No," I said quietly. "You built this. You don't understand what you've done." "Then explain it." He laughed once, bitter and tired. "It's bigger than you think." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not afraid anymore." He was silent. Then he tried one final weapon. "If this goes public, Lily will live with it forever." There was a time that would have broken me, a time when he could turn my love for my daughter into a leash around my throat. But something had shifted too deeply by then. "Lily will live with truth," I said, "not with your version of it." I hung up. The final hearing was set 6 weeks later. Those weeks felt like an entire second life. I sat for depositions. I learned how many ways a man can say, "I don't recall," when memory becomes inconvenient. I watched Nina resign from her practice before the ethics board could suspend her. I found out Mara had quietly left the city. I sold a bracelet Daniel gave me and used the money to repaint Lily's bedroom because she said the old color felt sad. Little by little, the house stopped feeling haunted. Lily changed too. Children always know more than adults think. Once the constant tension eased, she laughed louder, slept better, started asking direct questions instead of carrying silent worry like contraband. One night while we baked boxed brownies, she said, "Dad lies when he's trying to sound nice." I nearly dropped the spoon. "What makes you say that?" she shrugged. When grown-ups are telling the truth, they don't usually use too many careful words. Out of the mouths of children. I kissed the top of her head and turned back to the batter before she could see my eyes fill. But that wasn't the last thing I learned. A week before the hearing, Elise came over with a battered storage tin she found while cleaning out boxes from our mother's attic. Inside were old estate letters, property maps, and one handwritten note from my mother addressed to me in case legal confusion ever arose around the house. My mother had known Daniel admired control too much. She never trusted how interested he became in titles, deeds, and leverage after she got sick. In the note she wrote, "Love makes some people generous. It makes others strategic. Learn the difference before they smell your grief." I sat on the floor with that note in my hands and cried harder than I had over the divorce. Not because she was right, because even gone, she had still tried to protect me. The day of the final hearing, the courthouse felt colder than it should have. Daniel arrived pale, thinner and angrier than I had ever seen him. His confidence was still there, but now it looked expensive to maintain. Nina was not with him. Mara was nowhere. For the first time since this began, he seemed alone. Inside the courtroom, Miriam built the story piece by piece. Not a melodrama. not vengeance. A pattern. She showed the hidden clause, the forged signatures, the active debt under Hawthorne, the attempted trust encroachment, the transfer inquiry for Lily's school, the affair communications demonstrating strategic positioning, the misuse of mental health framing, the timing of Daniel's firm investigation. Each fact on its own was ugly. Together, they were devastating. Daniel's attorney tried to argue that marital breakdown creates confusion, that desperation causes poor drafting, that emotions color interpretation. But the documents were stubborn. Documents don't care how charming you sound. Then came Daniel's cross-examination. Miriam approached slowly, papers in hand. Mr. Bennett, did you or did you not tell Mrs. Bennett that Hawthorne Residential Holdings was dormant? I believed it effectively was. Did money move through it? Yes, but did you characterize relocation language as routine? It was not intended. Did you discuss with Ms. Nina Carter the likely impact of framing Mrs. Bennett as unstable? His face changed. That is being taken out of context. Miriam lifted a page. What is the correct context for the phrase, once papers are signed, it gets cleaner? Daniel didn't answer. Is the correct context your extramarital relationship with Ms. Carter, your pending financial exposure, or your effort to shift debt and custodial leverage onto your wife? Objection, his attorney snapped. The judge allowed the question in narrower form. Miriam did not smile. Mr. Bennett, what exactly were you trying to make cleaner? Daniel looked at me then. Not at the judge. Not at Miriam. At me. Maybe he expected fear, shame, some final appeal to our history. What he saw instead must have unsettled him, because for the first time in 13 years, I was not trying to save him from himself. His voice came out low. I was trying to end something broken. Miriam nodded once. By breaking it further. He said nothing. And then it was my turn. I had dreaded that moment for weeks. But when I took the stand, I found something surprising waiting for me on the other side of fear. Clarity. I told the truth. Not the polished kind. The human kind. I said I had loved my husband. I said I had believed him longer than I should have. I said grief, motherhood, and trust made me easier to manipulate because I kept assuming kindness where there was strategy. I admitted I had sent frantic texts. I admitted I cried, panicked, and begged for honesty. Then I looked at the judge and said, pain is not instability. It is the normal response to betrayal. The courtroom went very quiet. I spoke about Lily, about how carefully Daniel planted fear around her, about the hidden clause, about my mother's trust, about the moment I realized that the divorce itself was not his goal. Control was. Then Daniel's attorney stood for cross. Mrs. Irede. Bennett, would you agree you were emotionally distressed during this process? Yes. Would you agree you sent repetitive messages to my client? Yes. Would you agree that at times you felt unable to cope? I looked at him steadily. I felt devastated, and I still got up every day, cared for my daughter, protected my home, gathered evidence, complied with every court request, and told the truth under oath. So, no. I would not agree that I was unable to cope. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. Truth, when spoken without apology, has its own temperature. What happened next shocked even Daniel. After closing arguments, the judge asked one final question, whether either party wished to address the court briefly regarding the child's best interests. Daniel stood first. He spoke of stability, discretion, and preserving Lily from unnecessary scandal. He said children should be insulated from adult wrongdoing. On that point at least, he was right, just not in the way he meant. Then, I stood. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Your Honor, I said, my daughter does not need a perfect mother, she needs an honest one. She needs a home where love is not used as leverage, where paperwork is not a weapon, and where the truth does not change depending on who has more money in the room. I cannot give her a painless childhood. That part is already gone. But I can give her one thing from this moment forward. I can give her a mother who will never again confuse silence with peace. Daniel looked down. That was the first time I knew I had already won something bigger than the case. The ruling came 2 hours later. Primary custody to me. Shared parenting with strict communication boundaries. No relocation without court approval. Full forensic accounting to continue. Exclusive temporary control of the house and trust assets stayed with me pending civil review. The court also referred the forged document issue to the appropriate authorities. Daniel lost more than the hearing that day. He lost the privilege of being quietly dangerous. Outside the courthouse, reporters lingered because of the financial angle, but Miriam steered me through a side exit. The sky had cleared. I hadn't realized until then how long I'd been living under weather. On the courthouse steps, Daniel caught up to us. "Sarah," I turned. He looked wrecked. Not sorry, wrecked. There's a difference. For 1 second, I saw the man I married flicker beneath the ruin, the man who once fixed my mother's porch swing, who once kissed my forehead while I slept, who once knew how to love in ways that felt safe. Maybe that man had been real for a while. Maybe he had only been rehearsing. By then, it no longer mattered. "You didn't have to destroy me," he said. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because some people can burn down a house and still weep over the ashes on their own shoes. "You were willing to let me sign away my daughter, my home, and my future," I said. "What exactly did you think I was supposed to save?" He had no answer. Miriam opened the car door for me. Before I got in, I said the last thing I would ever say to him as a wife. "You mistook my trust for weakness. That was your mistake, not mine." Then I left. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet, not magically healed, not clean. Healing almost never arrives in elegant clothes. It came in grocery lists and therapy appointments and changing passwords. It came in laughter, returning by accident. It came in Lily asking if we could plant new roses in the backyard because the old ones looked tired. So we did. Mina sent one email. Long, tearful, full of regret and explanations that were really just prettier forms of selfishness. I deleted it after one sentence. Some apologies come too late to be healing. They only arrive because consequence finally found the sender. Daniel's firm terminated him. Investigations continued. Friends divided, then slowly sorted themselves according to who valued comfort over truth. I lost people. I also found out how little some losses deserve mourning. As for Miriam, I still don't know how to thank a person who hands you your own life back. She told me once, while we were finalizing the last property protections, "You did the hard part." I just read the fine print. But that wasn't true. The hard part was learning that surviving betrayal is not only about exposing the liar. It's about meeting the version of yourself who kept shrinking to keep love alive and refusing to live as her anymore. Months later, after the dust settled enough to breathe, Lily and I sat on the porch swing at sunset. The new roses were starting to bloom. She leaned against me, sleepy and warm, and asked, "Are we okay now?" I looked at the yard, the house, the evening light turning everything softer than it had any right to be after all we'd survived. "Yes," I said, "not because bad things didn't happen, because we know the truth now." She thought about that. "Truth makes things okay?" "No," I said, smiling a little. "Truth makes healing possible." She nodded like that made sense to her, and maybe children understand this better than adults do. Maybe that's why they cry honestly and forgive slowly and know exactly when a smile is fake. There's something I need to say. If you've ever been the person holding the pen, exhausted enough to sign just to stop hurting, read everything. Read the words. Read the silences. Read the sudden urgency. Read the version of you that someone else keeps trying to write on your behalf. Because the most dangerous people are not always loud. Sometimes they bring you clean documents, careful voices, and a reasonable deadline. Sometimes they call manipulation closure. Sometimes they call theft efficiency. Sometimes they wait until you are tired enough to confuse surrender with maturity. And sometimes the only thing standing between your ruin and your rescue is one person brave enough to say, "Don't sign that." I almost signed away my daughter's stability. I almost signed away my mother's last gift. I almost signed away debt that was never mine, shame that was never mine, and a future designed by someone who had already stopped loving me enough to tell the truth. But I didn't. And that is the part of the story I carry now. Not that I was betrayed, but that I woke up before betrayal became my fate. So if your hands are shaking and the room feels too small and the person across from you keeps calling your fear an overreaction, listen carefully. The clause that saves your life may be hidden, but so is the strength that refuses to sign it.